Hello guys, this is Yandtech. So in this video, we are going to be looking at how to install Active Directory domain service on a Windows Server 2019. So before we go into the installation of Active Directory domain service, let's first of all look at the overview of Active Directory domain service, what it is all about, and what are some of the key features that comes with Active Directory domain service. So Active Directory domain service is a directory service developed by Microsoft for Windows domain network. So it basically provides a centralized system for managing users, computers, and resources within an organization's network. So there are a whole lot of features and functionalities when it comes to Active Directory domain service. And the first we are going to discuss about is the directory services. So Active Directory domain service, abbreviated as ADDS, functions as a directory service organizing and managing information about network resources such as users, groups, computers, printers, and applications. Then we have another function known as domain controller. So Active Directory domain service relies on domain controllers to authenticate and authorize users and computers to access network resources. So these domain controllers store a copy of Active Directory database and it replicates changes to other domain controllers within the domain. Then Active Directory functions with a protocol or make use of a protocol known as Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, abbreviated as LDAP, which is used to provide a standard interface for accessing and managing directory information. Then we have another feature known as the single sign-on. So with Active Directory domains service, users can log in once using their credentials and access various resources across the network without needing to re-enter their credentials, right? And this single sign-on improve user experience and it goes by enhancing the security by reducing the number of password users need to remember. And the last feature we are going to look at, just to name a few, is a group policy. Group policy, when it comes to Active Directory domain service, enables administrators to define and to enforce security policies, settings, and configuration for users, right, and computers within the domain by making use of GPOs, known as group policy objects. So this centralized management and ensures consistency across the network. So that is Active Directory domain service. So we are going to look at how to install Active Directory domain service on a Windows Server 2019. So in order to install this service on a Windows Server 2019, once you log into Windows Server 2019, there is a feature known as Server Manager. There's a feature known as Server Manager. So if I click on Server Manager, this is Server Manager, this is how it looks. Under Server Manager, we have Add Roles and Features. So you click on Add Roles and Features. But before making a Windows server to become a domain controller, having it in mind that it is a server, then we are supposed to have a static IP. A server is supposed to have a static IP. So we first of all need to make this server to have a static IP. So the first thing we are going to do is the configuration phase. Let me bring up my notepad. Let's see what we are going to do. So the first thing we are going to do is to configure static. Configure static IP address on the server 2019. After the configuration, then we are going to proceed to install Active Directory Domain Service. Active Directory Domain Service. All right, there we go. So let's start with the first. For us to configure a server to have a static IP, the first thing we would do is to go into command prompt. So for us to go to command prompt, I can go to search and I type cmd and I click on command prompt. Then for us to look at the IP address of a Windows server, we do ipconfig. We do ipconfig/all. Then under ipconfig/all, under the internet adapter ethernet, we are going to see IPv4 address, and this is my IP 192.168.0.10. This is my subnet mask. This is a class C private IP address with a class C subnet mask, and this is my default gateway. And you are going to realize that this IP address was configured dynamically, making use of DHCP. So you see DHCP enabled, yes, so it got the IP address dynamically. So we are going to configure this IP address to be static. This is our gateway. So the static IP is supposed to fall within this same network, okay, within this same network. And we know it ranges from 0 to 255, where 0 is reserved for network address and 255 is reserved for broadcast address. So we have valid IP address as from 1 to 254. So in the course of this network that has been given to us, 192.168.0.1 and a gateway of 192.168.0.1, we have valid IP as of 192.168.0.2 up to 192.168.0.254. So we are going to pick an IP address, a valid IP address within that range to configure our static IP. So if I pick up an IP address within that range by making use of the command ping, ping is basically a command to test connectivity. So if I ping 192.168.0.50, okay, there we go. So we see there is a response but going to no destination. It simply means this IP address is within the range of our network, but it has not been connected to any host. It has not been connected to any system. Okay, so we are going to make use of this system for our configuration. Okay, so now we have the IP address. Now let's look at how to configure our system to have a static IP. Now for our system to have a static IP, going to the taskbar where we have the network icon, if I right click on the network icon and I go to open network and internet, click on open network and internet. Under open network and internet, you click on change adapter options. You click on change adapter options, then we have one adapter. So this is where we are going to configure the static IP. So if I right click on this guy and I go to properties, then we have two types of IP. We have the IPv4 and we have the IPv6. So I will scroll down to IPv4. This is IPv4 and I will click on IPv4 and I'll go to properties. Now we are going to realize that the IP address we saw was obtained through DHCP. Now we want to configure a static. So I'm going to click on the second option. Then I'm going to type the IP address 192.168.0.50, and the subnet mask of a class C is 255.255.255.0. So if I click on the box, there we go, we have the subnet mask. Then the default gateway, remember we saw the default gateway, this is the default gateway 192.168.0.1. so I'll come back to my configuration and I'll do 192.168.0.1. Now when it comes to the making a server a static IP to install Active Directory domain service, then the preferred DNS server is supposed to be the same as the IP address, right? So we are going to come here where we have the preferred DNS server, and we are going to type 192.168.0.50. So the preferred DNS server is supposed to be the same as the IP address. Once that has been configured, go ahead and you click on OK, and you click on close, and there we go. To initiate or to restart the Ethernet, I can go ahead and I disable this network device. Once it has been disabled, I go ahead again and I enable this device. All right, so we see it is now connected back to the internet. So I can go further to my command prompt. I can come back to my command prompt and I do ipconfig/all, and we are going to have our static IP configure 192.168.0.50, and we are going to realize that the DHCP, before the configuration it was yes, now we have configured a static IP and we have no. Okay, that is the first part. So if I minimize the screen and I close this, okay, now we are done with the first part, which is actually to configure the Windows Server 2019 to have a static IP. So I'll mark it as done. And the second is to install Active Directory. So for us to install Active Directory, I go to Server Manager. Under Server Manager, click on Add Roles and Features. Once you click on Add Roles and Features, it will begin, it's going to launch the wizard. Then you click on Next. We'll leave the installation type as role-based or future-based installation. You click on Next. Then the server selection, we are going to have the name of the server, then the IP address. It was 150, right? So let me quickly go back and verify the IP that we have. Okay, 192.168.0.50. So if I close Server Manager and I search for Server Manager again, our IP is supposed to show 50, not 10. So if I search for Server Manager, this is Server Manager. All right, Server Manager is loading. All right, you click on Add Roles and Features. You click on Next. You click on Next. There we go. So you see, we have 192.168.0.50. So it is supposed to have the static IP address. So you proceed and you click on Next. Now we are at the level of adding the role Active Directory domain service. So if we look the second option, we have Active Directory domain service. So you check the box and you click on Add Features. You click on Next. You click on Next. You click on Next and you click on Install. Okay, that's the installation process for Active Directory domain service. It's going to take some few minutes for the installation to be successful. All right, so installation complete. You go ahead and you click on close. So we can do two things. After the installation of Active Directory, we need to promote this server to become a domain controller. Remember, in the course of the explanation, I made mention of one of the features when it comes to Active Directory, and I mentioned domain controller, right? And I said Active Directory domain service relies on domain controller to authenticate and to authorize users and computers to access network resources. So this domain controller that we are about to promote stores a copy of the Active Directory database, and it also replicates changes to other domain controllers within the domain. So we are going to click on promote this server to a domain controller. So I'll click on promote, and we have three options. Add a domain controller to an existing domain. This is actually a new domain controller. There's no other domain. So add a new domain to an existing forest. There's no forest. Add a new forest. So we are going to click on add a new forest, and they'll ask us for a root domain name. Then I'll give a root domain name as Yandtech.local. Okay, we are going to make use of like Yandtech.local under the root domain name. Then you click on next. Okay, we have the forest functional level and we have the domain functional level. Then they're asking for the password and the confirm password. So I'm going to put my password. The password, you can put the same password as that of the login password for the domain for the server, the one you use. So I'm going to put in my password. Okay, I'll click on next. Click on next. The NetBIOS domain name. You give it some few seconds. All right, there we go. Once you have the name, you click on next. All right, so we have the database folder, we have the log file folder, we have the sys role folder. Okay, click on next, no changes. Then we click on next, that's the review option. Then it's going to do a prerequisite check if everything is fine as to the configuration. All right, there we go. So you see all the checks passed successfully. So we go ahead and we click on install. And that is just it. After the installation, the system is going to reboot. Then our server then our server is going to change from a domain controller from a server now to become a domain controller. So let's wait for this to install. All right, so we successfully install Active Directory domain service. We promote the domain service to become a domain controller. We promoted the server to become a domain controller. So after we successfully promote the server to become a domain controller, then the system is going to reboot. It's going to take a few minutes depending on how fast your system is. So my system has just rebooted. And that's why you are seeing this screen. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up my system. I'll go to input, go to keyboard, then I'll go to insert Control Alt Delete. Then you will see it has changed. Right now we are seeing the domain name and then we are seeing the username. So I'll go ahead and I'll put my password. Oops. Okay, loading up my profile, and there we go. So there are different ways to verify if the server is now a domain controller. So the first method we are going to look at for verification is to go to the library. You click on the library, you click on PC, you right click and you go to properties. You will discover it has changed. The domain has changed. It has changed from a work group to a domain, and this is a domain name. All right. Now we have the full computer name as Yandtech.local. So this is the domain name. So from here, it is the first verification. Then the second verification. Now, once we install Active Directory, once a server becomes a domain controller, there are 6 consoles that comes in to the domain controller. And for us to verify that, under Server Manager, you go to Tools. The first is the Active Directory Administrative Center, which is the ADAC. The second is the Active Directory Domain Trust, ADDT. We have the Active Directory module for Windows PowerShell. Then we have the Active Directory site and services. We have the Active Directory users and computers. Then the last one, we have the group policy management. We spoke about group policy, right? That group policy in Active Directory domain service enables administrators to define and enforce security policies, settings, and configuration for users and computers within the domain using group policy object. So that is it. And the last for us to verify, the last method for us to verify is making use of a command where we are going to net start to make sure it is a domain controller, but we are already setting coming from the stores and then coming from the library having a domain name. Okay, now we are good to go. So this is how to make a server a domain controller by installing Active Directory service. So just to do a recap of what we have done so far, the first thing in order to make a server a domain controller is to first of all make sure that server has a static IP. Now, when the server has been configured to have a static IP, then we can proceed to add the roles and features for Active Directory domain service. So after adding Active Directory domain service, then we need to promote the server to become a domain controller by making use of a domain name, Yandtech.local. That's what we have used. And after promoting, there's going to be a reboot where the system is going to restart and then everything will be set up. Then we log in and then we do the verification by looking at going to properties, going to this PC, going to properties, looking at the name of the domain name which has actually changed, the model which has actually changed from work group to domain, and we are going to have the domain name given. Then we're also going to have the full computer name given as well. Then the second, to be sure it is now a domain controller, is the different modules that it will come in with, where we have the ADAD, the ADDT, the AD for PowerShell, the ADSS, and the ADUC. Then we have the group policy management. So this video will help you in order to make your server a domain controller.